Hey everybody, DJ here, and this is going to be the next part of the Natron Crash Course series. We're going to be going over how to add some chromatic aberration, some lens distortion, and a vignette to the image. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And if you also would like, we have a Discord server that you can join. If you have any questions or you just like to collaborate or chat, and I also have a Patreon for anybody who feels like they would like to contribute to the channel to cover the costs of making these tutorial videos. So let's pick up where we left off, and you should have something that looks pretty much like this. So we have created a glow effect, we have made a lens dirt effect here, and the next thing that we're going to be doing is adding some chromatic aberration, and that is going to kind of change the overall look of this. So first, what we're basically going to do is we're going to use this as our sort of like offshoot to add the chromatic aberration. So we're going to hit tab here and just start typing in chromatic aberration. You should see a thing here that says gimmick chromatic aberration. This should have been installed when you did your original install. I mentioned it in the downloaded installation that you'll want to make sure that these are all checked on. If not, you can always rerun the install process and check those on to make sure that you have these available, because it kind of makes things a little bit easier. I'm going to disconnect this viewer really quick, and basically what it does is it takes whatever the source is and it starts to basically create a sort of faked chromatic aberration. So if I take the source and I just plug it into our original read node here, and I click this, type 1, and I'm just going to click this little button here to get rid of all these, we can kind of see a little bit of an effect. So if we highlight this or click on it and hit D and go back and forth, you can kind of take a look at this. And you can see there's a little bit of a sort of reddening of the outside of some of these. And then also you can see a greenish effect happening here. And that's basically chromatic aberration. So I'm not going to go into the details of what this is, but a lot of cameras based on, how old the camera is will have a lot of this or a little, and depending on whatever kind of settings when you're actually doing photography, this might show up. So when people are dirtying their images out of CGI, they'll often add a little bit of chromatic aberration and a sort of lens distortion effect to have it match a little bit closer to the sort of like non-perfect effect that you would get if you were shooting on, say, a film camera or any sort of digital camera in real life. So to mimic real life, often we will dirty up the image like this, just like these glow effects and stuff like that, to make it look more cinematic and all that kind of stuff. So if we double click on the chromatic aberration node here and take a look at the settings over here, you can very easily just start to click and drag a couple things around and you can pretty much see what it does. So if we take this and we move it around, you can see how much or how little it will actually add here. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn on the proxy mode here, and I'm just going to turn this to an 8 because we really don't need to see that much of detail here, and it'll be a lot faster for you and me to sort of see the effects. So if I click and drag this, you can see how the separation of those colors is basically being shifted here for this primary color, and we can shift it also on the Y. You can make a sort of effect like that. And then the secondary color here, you can pull this around and you can start to get all sorts of funky effects like that. And this may work out well for you depending on if you're doing some sort of like funky animation with a logo or something like that. Actually, I'm going to bring up a logo real quick. So if we take a really quick look at the A24 logo, there's a lot of this sort of like chromatic aberration effect that you can kind of take a look at. And we're not going to be creating that sort of thing exactly, but you'll sort of recognize this sort of look when you are seeing different animations or stuff that people are doing. People use this sort of chromatic aberration effect quite a bit in cinema, and it leads to some pretty cool motion graphics and stuff like that. So there are a lot of effects that you could do with this, but for the purposes of this tutorial, basically what we're going to be doing is just adding a little bit of a chromatic aberration effect to the image just to give it a little bit of a push in the more realistic look of things, and then we're going to be using a mask to sort of mask that out. And because people are used to the way that Blender does a sort of like chromatic aberration with a little bit of a lens distort, I'm going to be showing how you can match that as well. So if we kind of like take a look at this again, you can see how when we push these around, we get quite a few different colors as the colors are being separated. You can actually change the colors here if you go and you click on the little color wheel, and you can select some different colors here and change what's actually being seen in the chromatic aberration effect. Now, to sort of like keep this more of what it really would be like, or at least a little bit more realistic, we're going to set this back. So we're going to set this back here to default. Right click here, reset to default. And we're not going to go quite as far. Let's do this again here. Reset to default. There we go. So if you click on right click this right here and go to reset to default, you can get this reset defaults here. And let's take these, and I'm actually not going to do too much in this secondary color here. I'm just going to kind of push this around a little bit like that. Actually, let's see here, maybe 0, because that's a little bit much, and then pull these back. And that's kind of like something that I would kind of say is a little bit more realistic or something like that, as far as like just an added effect. It's not quite realistic because we do have this proxy mode set here. And if we remove that, you can see that it's not as visible. And if we look really, really, really close here, you can see that there's that tinge of a magenta there and then a green. But if we zoom way out, you can see that's not really there. But if we turn it on and turn it off, it actually does add a little bit of dirtiness and realism to the image, because that's kind of more of what people expect to see nowadays when they get their renders out, and they're seen in like large AAA films or anything like that. So let's actually take this and we're going to plug it right into this right here, the merge node at the bottom underneath our lens dirt, because we actually want to set the chromatic aberration to our entire image at this point, which has all this other stuff here, or at least that's what we're going to be doing on this one. And I'm going to pull these out to about this. Let's see what this looks like at 5 or something like that. And you'll notice that the more the contrast between, which is one of the reasons why I picked this starry background here, you can see that the image is being separated into these two different colors here. And you can actually see on this little lens dirt here how there's the white in the center, or the whiter color, and then it's being separated out into the different ones, the different colors here on either side. But then these points of light here, if we were to disable this hitting D, you can see that the points of light, as they are separated, we start to kind of lose what those were. And depending on your opinion on how that looks, you could say that it looks good or bad or whatever. But again, this is a crash course to show you what you can do with this sort of stuff. And this may or may not go with what you're trying to do, but at least it is going to show you how you can add this effect. So I'm going to keep this at, more or less this shift to Y, the X and Y for the primary color at around 5 right here, just so that you can see what's going on there. And the next thing that we're actually going to do is I'm going to show you how to make a really cool sort of like distortion effect using this chromatic aberration. Now, I'm going to show you this method and another method to do a sort of lens distortion-esque sort of thing, but this actually works pretty well for these sort of stars, and it will give you sort of a familiar look, and you'll see what I'm talking about when we do it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to add that little effect there. So if you go in here and you start to type in God rays, and generally this is used to create some really cool ray effects, but I'm going to show you how to make sort of this chromatic aberration a little bit more of like a lens distortion. So if we clear all of our properties here, double click on the God rays and view through there, you'll notice that nothing really happens at first, okay? And that's because you have to start moving some things around to see something. And if we take this center and we left click and drag it and move it up here, there's not really anything happening. And if we move it around, there's nothing that's really happening. So let's go over here to the center and we'll reset the center here. Now what we're going to do so that you can actually see what's going on is we're actually going to take the scale here, and I'm going to hold control, left click and drag this, and you can see that now we're starting to see a different effect going on. And if I look around the edges, you can see that there is a little bit of what would be sort of like a a relatively common effect that you might see in some very major Hollywood films that start with Star Wars. Just throwing it out there, it might look something like that. This is a kind of lens distortion effect, pseudo lens distortion effect that you could throw on here with the chromatic aberration to make it look kind of cool. Now we're going to fix the center area here so that it doesn't look super blurry like this. We're actually going to remove this area with a mask. And if you remember what we did last time, that's pretty much what the method we're going to use this time. But basically, what we're doing here is we're creating sort of like this neat little blur blend effect that causes this sort of like star look like this. Now, if we take the chromatic aberration here and we pump this up a bit more, you can see that we're having a little bit more of that chromatic aberration lens distortion effect that you might see in something like uh, Blender's Compositor or something like that. It's not exact. This is just a quick way of doing this type of effect, and you can have something that looks kind of like that. So I don't really like this super like distortion look here, so I'm actually going to pull these back down to about a 5. And then on the God rays here, I might do a scale of maybe 1.015, maybe a little bit more. Let's hold control, pull it up, maybe something like this. We'll just do something like that for the purposes of this tutorial. So next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a mask. Well, we'll merge these together. So we want the God rays here, this chromatic aberration with the distortion effect, to go over the top of this one here. So A over B, like this. And then let's take a look at that. And that's what we have currently. And it's basically taking over the entire thing. And if we double click on the merge and we take this mix and we pull it down, and then we pull it back up to 1, you can basically see that we either have it or we don't, or we get a mixture between. And as we talked about last time, you can basically use a roto paint node to mask out the section that you want. Now, it does have a kind of a cool effect, and it's really up to you on how you're going to create your mask and how much you want to include or not. But I'm going to just briefly, really quick, go over how we can make this mask. So let's hit P, which brings up this roto paint node here. And we're going to take this and we're going to plug this mask part right into this roto paint here. Then if we double click on the roto paint node here, you can see that we have nothing in our properties here. And we're going to go here, left click and hold that so you can grab the ellipse tool. And we're just going to click, oops, we're just going to left click and drag a circle. And you can see that it already has started to populate a mask in our scene. So the area that's in the circle is now the chromatic aberration effect, and the area outside is being masked as the other. So that's the opposite of what we want. And what we kind of want to do here is invert the mask or change this up a little bit, but I'll show you really briefly how we can uh, simplify this. But first, let's just set up our mask how we want it to be. So I don't want it to be if I clear these really quick, you can see how there's a very harsh line between what's there and what's not, okay? So if we double click the Roto Paint node, we can actually pull these handles right here that will feather the edges. So if we take this and we left click and drag this out, and we do the same up here, and we do the same here, and we do the same here, you can see that now there is a more of a gradation effect. And if we look right through the Roto Paint node, that's the basically alpha channel that we're creating, or the mask that we're creating when we are using these shapes like this. Now, very simply, when we have this sort of effect here where we have the alpha that's being created here, and if I hover over here and you look up at the top left, you can go between the alpha channel and the RGB value by hitting A and just hitting that a couple different times. You can see that the white value here that the Roto Paint node is, so if you look at this, the color is white. It's basically creating an alpha channel along with the RGB, okay? So with that alpha channel there, what we want to do is we actually want to invert this mask. We want to invert that so that we can actually see the other side or the other effect on the outside edges. We don't want to see it on the inside, okay? So simply we hit tab, we type in invert, and then this node gets pulled up and you can see that now our mask has been inverted and the effect is going on the outside like that and not on the inside. And if we double click on this and move this all the way up to a 1, you can see that now we have this sort of warping effect, and we can mix this and add it or decrease it as much as we want. Now, my suggestion is that you'll want to make your mask kind of closer to the inside of this for this particular project, and make sure that you keep these dragged close to the outside so that you don't get that issue there. We want to pull this interior like this and pull this up like that, and then pull this one in a bit. Oops, looks like I grabbed everything there. Grab this point here, pull this out to here, and take this point here, pull it in, and pull this point out like that. Maybe something like this. Okay? And that's my suggestion, is you might want to do something like that. Now you could pull this in and do something like that where you do have the edges having a little bit of that warping effect. It's really up to you on how you want to uh, show this. But my suggestion is that it looks kind of cool to have it sort of like this cool warping effect on the outside, and then leave the interior a little bit more um, like this so that it's more visible and legible. Now, one thing that we'll want to do really quick here is we want to organize this sort of node structure. I actually put these on the wrong side. This should actually come over here as our mask, and then these should come over here on this side. But you can see that I have a little bit of a problem here. I have this source that's going at this weird angle like this, and then I have this kind of funkiness that's happening here, okay? And we can very easily resolve this issue and make this more of like a right angle approach, or have more right angles. If you hold down control, little, oops, if you hold down control, little yellow dots show up. And if you click on that, you can actually add this little node here. And then you can take this and plug it right into there, hold control again, left click and drag, and move that over here. And now you have a very nice uh, approach that's box-like and organized instead of all those weird angles. Okay. Then on the left here, you can have your mask. So that way we have all of our effects on the right side here. So you have your glow, you have your lens dirt, you have all that stuff over here, and we can add a backdrop just like this. Whoops, looks like I had it over here. Simple, hold control, left click and drag this over. And we're actually going to put it just like this. Take this and make it a little bit larger. And then we will double click on this and we will call this Chromatic Aberration. And I've been spelling it wrong the whole time. That's fine. It's a hard word to spell. So Chromatic Aberration, and let's make this, let's do a blue, maybe something like this here. Okay. And then on the left, what we can do is we can add another backdrop. Let's actually select both of these, hit tab, click backdrop, and then we will resize this up, hold control to move this around, double click it, and we will call this Chromatic Aberration Mask. Okay. And for that, we will put that a different shade of blue, just like that. So now we have the mask over here on the left, and then we have the chromatic aberration on the right, and we have a very nice linear path from our node here, our read node, that goes all the way down, and everything's very easy to see. Now, probably the best thing is to actually put this grade and color correct in its own little backdrop, but this is fine just right here because you can see what's happening with the coloring effect there. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of a lens distortion. And this is done a couple different ways. And I'll just sort of like quickly run over what lens distortion kind of is or does or whatever. So, lens distortion is basically when you shoot something, there's a lens on the camera, and the lens on the camera will warp the edges of your frame and the objects that are in the scene. And, the easiest, most obvious thing is like a fisheye lens. So, if you do a search here for fisheye lens distortion or something like that, you'll be able to see that there's this, distortion effect that's going on here. Okay. So the lens distortion is a very regular thing in CGI. The first thing that they would often do is when you get your original, and this is a little bit higher level stuff here, but just work with me and I'll briefly discuss it. If they get a quote background plate or the original footage from the people shooting the film, there will often be a kind of lens distortion. And they will often do a de-distort or an undistort, or sort of like remove the lens distortion from the image. Because what they need to do is take that image, throw it through all of its other grading and the lens dirt and everything else with the CGI 3D elements added to it, or lens flares or lens dirt or whatever it is that they're throwing into it, then they have to distort the image again. So they will often undistort or do a lens distortion removal, do all the effects, and then at the very end, throw the lens distortion back on over the top so that everything looks to be uniform. And it's another sort of like um, dirtying up of the image, because a lot of times when photographers or videographers are shooting, they try to minimize the amount of dirt as much as possible. Even the famous, or infamous J.J. Abrams style lens flares and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff is just added in post so that it looks cool. Okay. But in the past, it was something that kind of people hated because it was something that was baked into your image when you shot the footage, and they couldn't really remove it. A lot of times nowadays, they'll actually remove a lot of that stuff and then add it again in post just so that they can actually control where all that stuff is. So, what we're going to do here, we're not going to undistort anything because there's nothing to undistort. We're just going to add a little bit more of a lens distortion on the entire image. So, if we hit tab here and you type in lens, you'll see here that there's a node called lens distortion. And if we take this, grab this source right here and pipe it into our node tree, and take the viewer and look through there, double click the lens distortion node like this, you can see that there's a whole bunch of stuff over here. Now I'm going to make this very, very simple and very clear and obvious because there's a lot of stuff here that you can do. See, there's the radial fisheye lens here where you can do that kind of effect, and you can do all of this sort of stuff here. Or we can make this very simple by either clicking the nuke model or the PF barrel, and you can just mess with a couple of the items here. I'm going to reset this to the default. I'm going to choose nuke, and we're going to pull this in this K1 right here. We're just going to pull this to the right a little bit. So we're adding a little bit of a distortion like that on the edges and a little bit of a distortion like this. Let's do kind of like that there. Maybe something like this. So basically we're adding a little bit of a distortion overall. And if I hit D, you can see the before and after. If we look at the edges here, you can see the before and after of the lens distortion. Just like that. So it's up to you to play with these and get something that you kind of like. You can play with the squeeze effect here. Let's turn this back on so we can actually see what's going on. The squeeze effect here can squeeze it in one direction or the other, like this. You can change some of these here. You can change the different values on the K1 and the K2. Just keep in mind that if you pull it in, it looks kind of like a CRT TV sort of effect here. If you pull these in, see this white line here, that's our actual composition of our project. If you pull these in like this, you're going to have to transform your image in the end larger to cover your format. Okay, so if you do something like that, you will end up needing to put in a transform and scaling this up like that so that it covers the entire image again. So, be careful when you do stuff like that to make sure that you're, really adding what you kind of want there to be. This is a step you don't necessarily have to have, but often it is recommended that when you're doing CGI, you add a lens distortion at the very end, even if it's slight, because pretty much anything that you shoot with a real camera will have a little bit of a lens distortion on it. Even the best stuff that's out there has some kind of lens distortion. So this is often a step that you want to take, and I'm going to leave it linear because we're not really doing a whole lot as far as the effects. You could take these and put them together like this, highlight those, and add a backdrop if you wish, and call this lens distort. Lens distort like that, and we will color this, let's do a yellow. Okay, so you could do that if you'd like. Now, the last effect that we're going to be doing here, we're going to be adding a little bit of a vignette. So vignetting is another one of those dirty, sort of like dirtying up your image sort of things where you have a darker or a whiter edge around the image. Usually it's a darker look because that's what's more, quote, cinematic or is used a lot more in photography. And it sort of like helps lead your eye into the center of your image. So what we're going to do here is that I'm going to show you how you can use what's called a constant to make a color. And then you can use a roto paint, just like we did here for the mask, to basically mask out what is being uh, the area that is affecting the image. So because with a vignette, we really just want the edges to be affected and not so much the center. So if we go in here and we take, let's say, a constant. So we'll go here, hit tab, type in constant. And we're just going to look through this really quick by hitting 1 and double clicking on it. And you can see that let's actually get rid of our properties over here like this. There's nothing here. And if I double click on this, this is what it looks like. And you see right here it says color is 0. So if I left click and drag this up, it turns into a white color. And if I left click and drag this down, it goes to a black. If you click this right here, you can also choose a color by messing with these and, selecting it from here. And the thing that you really want to make sure that you're understanding is your alpha channel, okay? Now, naturally, if I hit cancel here and I pull this up to 1 and I click this, you see right there it says alpha channel 255. So basically it's taking the alpha and it's like putting it up to where it's actually being used. And if I hit OK and I hit A here, you can see that it's changing to alpha. And if I keep hitting A and I go between RGB and the alpha, there is an alpha channel there. Now, if I take this and I move it down to 0 and I do the same thing, you can see that black, there's no alpha channel, okay? So what we want is we actually want this to be a black color, but also the alpha channel should be on. So I'm going to type this as 255 so that it's full on alpha channel and hit OK. So if I look up here, this is currently set to the alpha, so it's white. And if I hit A, if I click in here and I hit A and go to the RGB, you can see that it's black. And that's basically what we want. So let's hit M to bring in a merge node. And we want A, which is actually the black here, to go over B, which is this right here. I'm going to hit 1 to view through here. It's black. And what we want to do is set this to multiply. Now, if I take this little value here and you can see that it's basically like either fully black or it's 0, okay? So it's not really doing the effect that we want. We want to be able to mask out a section and then have the edges being affected and not technically or not necessarily the center. So it's basically the same thing as we actually did up here with our lens dirt. So we can take the same RotoPaint node here. So I'm going to copy this, go down here and paste it. Whoops. Take this, take the BG, put it into the constant, and view through there, and that's what we have. And then take the A channel and put it into the RotoPaint. And now when we look at this, and we pull this up, you can see that now there's a vignetting or a darker edge there as I pull the mix up and down. So that was a very simple way of doing that with a constant, where you make sure that you have a black value or a dark value. You can even color this if you'd like to make it a dark red or something like that, and making sure that the alpha channel is set to 255. Then you use a roto paint to create your mask, and then you use a multiply merge operation here to put it over the top. Now, what you could do also is if you have some sort of image, you could actually there are textures that are vignette textures that you could multiply, just, do a reformat, kind of like we did here, a reformat, and then you could make a mask or not, depending on what it is. But you could take an image that has a vignette already on it and do a multiply operation, which will basically take that texture and put it over the top, just like a regular vignette. But what we're going to do instead is I'm going to show you how you can take a texture like this here. So this is actually just a downloaded PBR texture from texturehaven.com. And you see this right here. It's just a very dark gray image here. It says Rock 8 Spec 4. This is a specularity map. I'm just going to click, drag, and drop this right in here. And instead of the BG being the constant, I'm going to change it to this read node. And if we do that, When we view through here, you can see that it's kind of like a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on here that's kind of like darkening the entire image. So what we want to do is we actually want to take this constant, or not the constant, but the read node, and throw in a reformat so that instead of it being this gigantic 4096 by 4096, double click on the reformat node, take the format and change this to UHD 4K, and then view through there, and you can see that it does like that. And then for the BG here, throw that in there. And the problem is that now this whole thing is becoming black, and we can see here that the alpha channel is not quite right. So what we're going to do here is that in our roto paint node right here, take this and change this instead of atop, change this to over, and now it makes a white effect here instead of the black. And then look through the multiply again, and now you can see that we have that effect happening where we have the vignetting, but instead it has a little bit of a textured look here. And you can, if I double click the merge operation here, you can actually pull that down and change that to be more or less what you actually want it to look like. So instead of it being straight up a constant color, you can add a little bit of a textured effect there if you'd like. And I'll just pipe this in here, and you can see how that has a little bit of a difference in the effect on the edges right there. So it's really up to you and if you want to do that, but I thought it'd be cool to show you two different ways of sort of adding that. And if I put this back to the constant and we look back through here with the RotoPaint node, basically nothing has changed even when we change this to over. It just has a different operation of this paint effect that works as the mask here, okay? And then you can use the mix here on your merge operation to decide how much or how little, and then alter your mask shape here on your Roto Paint node for how you really want that to look. So before we end this particular session, I'm going to actually, I like this little textured look here. So I'm going to take this constant, I'm going to put it up here. I'm going to take all these, hit tab, and I'm going to type in backdrop. Let's actually hold control, move it over here just like that. And we'll call this vignette. Looks like I have caps lock on. Vignette. And then change the color of this to, let's do a purple color like that. Or I guess mauve, I don't know. And there we go. So we have very nice organized file. And we have added quite a few layers of compositing effects over the top. And now you should end up with something that looks kind of like this. So thanks very much for following along with me in this Natron Crash Course tutorial series. The next episode, I will be showing you how to render these out, whether it's a animation that you're doing or if it's just a single image. Again, if you haven't yet, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time on DJ Tutorials.